A trend that started during the previous U.S. administration is now accelerating under President Joe Biden. The U.S. is reducing its role in the Middle East to focus more on the Asia-Pacific, specifically in confronting China. But in an ironic twist, China itself could be the one stepping in to fill the vacuum left by the U.S. in the energy-rich Gulf. Foreign ministers from several Arab states, together with the Secretary General of the Gulf Cooperation Council, arrived in Beijing on Monday as part of a 5-day visit. The talks will focus on a possible free trade agreement between the world's largest oil importer and the world's most energy-rich region. But China's interests in the Gulf don't stop at just energy. U.S. intelligence agencies recently released satellite images that appear to show ballistic missile sites in Saudi Arabia that have been built with Chinese help. Speculation is also growing that the UAE suspended its plan to buy U.S. F-35 fighter jets to signal its displeasure at Washington's pressure to limit its trade ties with China. So, how will the U.S.-China rivalry affect the Middle East, and which countries will be caught in the middle? And to answer that, joining me now from Doha is Mahjoob Zweiri. He is the director of the Gulf Studies Center at Qatar University. And in Washington, D.C. is Giorgio Cafiero, the CEO of Gulf State Analytics. Gentlemen, welcome to Straight Talk. It's good to have you on the program. Now that foreign ministers from several Arab countries, together with the Secretary General of the Gulf Cooperation Council, are in Beijing for talks. So, Mahjoob, walk us through these latest developments and how do Arab and Gulf countries see their relations with China, both in terms of trade and security ties?
As you know, there were four foreign ministers from the Gulf states actually visiting China these days for 5 days.
Yes.
And this visit is coming just after a few months of the crisis concerning the oil prices. So there is a serious concern in China about the oil prices, but also there is a concern in the Gulf states how China will handle this. China is very demanded when it comes to the oil, and there is a serious concern about the alternative, whether China will move to other states to buy oil. It seems to me that this concern is coming from Saudi Arabia, from Kuwait, from Bahrain, from Oman, who are relying on oil as a main revenue for their own budget.
So do you think they did see this as an opportunity to assure China's energy security amid this turmoil in Kazakhstan, which is vital for Beijing's energy security? Or it was just a coincidence?
I think that is one possibility, that they want to assure China that China doesn't need to be worried about supply, but also there is a real collaboration between those two countries. Saudi Arabia is developing a very interesting relations with China, Kuwait as well, Bahrain and Oman, and they are trying to diversify their economy by opening on China. So it seems there is a lot of beyond the issue of oil, yes. And there is a serious debate now about even security measures for the future, and in the time where the United States is withdrawing itself from the region.
So, Georgia, has the US's drawdown from the Middle East pushed these countries to realign their policies and solve their problems among themselves? And are they vying to become more independent to US policies? And if so, is that possible?
There's no doubt that in all of the Arab states within the GCC, there are major concerns about the wisdom of remaining so dependent on Washington as their security guarantor. And GCC states are absolutely trying to take stock of new realities in a more multipolar world, a new world in which China is far more powerful than it was decades ago. And the Gulf Arab states definitely see a future in which they need to have much deeper ties with China. And the visit that these ministers are paying to China right now is a huge part of that. And this goes way beyond energy. This brings us to tech, to trade, investment, and in certain ways, to some extent, security as well. But this is not limited to China. The Gulf Arab states are also trying to deepen their relations with France, Russia, and some other countries too, as part of this effort to diversify relations and become much less dependent on the U.S.
So Mahjoob, the UAE has recently suspended its F-35 fighter jet program with the U.S. It stated that sovereign operational restrictions were part of the reason for this suspension. What were they hinting at?
That is the major shift of the relations. I mean, this deal between the United Arab Emirates and the United States, that was significant, and it was significant to the American economy. Coming to this conclusion, it was a very clear message to Washington that Gulf states are serious on diversifying their own relations. And I think the way how it's been closed between both countries is very interesting, because the comments from Washington was not really that they are worried about what happened. But let me add also another dimension. China, for example, now is keeping its eye on the new city on the Red Sea, which is a huge project suggested by Prince Mohammed bin Salman. And the technology of Huawei is likely to occupy that new city. And that was also another concern to Washington, because Washington wants to oppress the technology of Huawei and try to ban it as much as they can. And now the negotiation between Riyadh and China is moving very fast on actually replacing the technology of Huawei and having it basically in control in the new.
Yes. So let's move to Saudi Arabia, Georgia. How significant is the discovery of ballistic missile sites in Saudi Arabia, which were reportedly built with the Chinese help? The Saudis haven't commented on that report yet, but what kind of an impact it'll have on U.S.-Saudi relations?
This news, which came out late last year, is not welcome in Washington. U.S. officials are definitely not happy about this. However, I'm not so sure that this is going to result in Washington imposing sanctions on any institutions or individuals inside the kingdom. The U.S. realizes that Saudi Arabia and China have cooperated in terms of missiles before. This is not necessarily new, and the U.S. Does value its partnership with Saudi Arabia in so many different ways, and I think Washington will be careful in terms of how it responds to this development. But again, there's no doubt that this is news that is not welcome in Washington. But there are also some people here in D.C. who are pointing out that this is sort of a natural consequence of the Biden administration maybe trying to give a bit of a cold shoulder to Saudi Arabia. And Riyadh is letting Washington know that it has other options.
Yeah, Mahjoob, now that China is giving assistance to both Iran and Saudi Arabia in developing their ballistic missile programs, why has Saudi Arabia's missile program not received the same level of scrutiny like Iran's?
It's obvious. First of all, this project seemed just started. I mean, maybe 2 years or less now. Generally speaking, to change the defense strategy of Saudi Arabia, it would need a lot of time. So this project itself is not causing Washington a lot of concern, because Washington looks at what is after that. Is Saudi Arabia, serious of changing its defense strategy? Are they moving seriously toward Chinese technology? So this is just a wake-up call. It's obvious that Washington now is monitoring it, and they had this before. I mean, a few years ago, Saudi Arabia talked about a nuclear energy, peaceful nuclear energy, but also United States did not take this seriously. So I think it's the same scenario now is being repeated.
So, Georgia, what kind of a balancing act does China play between Iran and Saudi Arabia, known as bitter enemies?
Yes, China has a very special foreign policy. China goes to pains to avoid taking sides in the Middle East's geopolitical disputes. Unlike the United States, China doesn't automatically side with Saudi Arabia against Iran or vice versa. Beijing is always trying to deepen its relations with Tehran and the GCC states simultaneously. China rejects this notion of a sort of a zero-sum game where any improvements in its relationship with the Islamic Republic is automatically at the expense of Chinese relations with GCC countries, and also vice versa. And to the credit of Chinese foreign policy decision makers, they have been able to improve ties with all countries in the Gulf simultaneously. It's very significant, and it's very impressive.
So, Mahjoob, what's your take on the Chinese foreign policy? I mean, has China been flexing its muscles too much? I mean, is it able to deal with the Middle Eastern countries while confronting the U.S. aggression in the Asia-Pacific? And can it be successful at all fronts at the same time?
I think China is following a strategy of two components. One, diversify its own alliances. And the second strategy, or the second element of the strategy, is basically filling the vacuums that the United States is leaving behind themselves. I think China and Russia are very active and actually proactive in doing so. And it seems to me that China is moving in that direction. Having said that, China is still hesitant in being fully engaged in the Middle East politics. They still, have this guy step back, step front, rather than, putting all their weight in the region, including the Gulf.
And one last question, Georgia. How is the latest tense political situation in the Middle East affecting Israel's relations with the U.S.? And why has Israel, do you think, pledged informing the U.S. on any major deals with China?
Well, this is an interesting question, and you're absolutely right that geopolitical competition between Washington and Beijing plays out in other parts of the Middle East, too, not only in the Gulf region. Look, I don't think that we can imagine a day coming up anytime soon in which China replaces the U.S. In terms of that country, which has a special relationship with Israel. Israel is not going to abandon the United States for China. Anyone who would ever suggest that, we could dismiss that kind of thinking. But there's no doubt that Israel and China are growing closer, and this is something that not only the Biden administration, but also the Trump administration put pressure on Tel Aviv to try to convince the Israelis to back off their relations with Beijing. But I'm not so sure the U.S. will have such an easy time doing that when we talk about ports or we talk about technology or other spheres. Israel, I think, is pretty optimistic about what it can gain from deeper ties with China.
All right, gentlemen, unfortunately, we'll have to leave it here. Thank you very much for joining me on Straight Talk.